Hi, I'm Sally Thomas from the Mater Amabilis support group, and I am here to talk to you today about copywork, which is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. And hopefully, as this title suggests, this little presentation will in fact make copywork clear for you, the homeschooling parent. You can't really hang around Charlotte Mason circles for very long without hearing about copywork as one of the sort of almost really foundational parts of the Charlotte Mason method. I mean, you hang around with Charlotte Mason people and you quickly pick up words like living books and narration. And copywork is usually, it's almost like one of a triumvirate, sorry, of those methods. And you might be wondering, well, two major things. One is why? Why copywork? Why is it important? Why is it such a foundational method in the Charlotte Mason world? And how? How do I actually successfully make this happen in my homeschool? So those are the two things that I really hope that this presentation will answer for you today. So let's look first at why copywork. And here's an example of some copy work that one of my children did in about the third grade, I think. That was a year when we were really focusing on cursive. A lot of people do cursive first. We didn't. Charlotte Mason, in fact, talks about printing before starting cursive, but I know that there are lots of arguments about beginning with cursive. And so I'm not here to tell you which thing you should decide to do. I think that's really something that's part of your parental discernment. But anyway, I can kind of date this little piece of copy work just by the fact that it is in cursive, which we didn't do all the time. So officially, as in fact my note here says, the purpose for copy work is to teach and reinforce good handwriting. And I guess if you want a question that might branch off from this is, why would you do copy work instead of any one of the number of handwriting programs that are out there? And my answer would be that, and I think Charlotte Mason's answer would be that once the child has achieved some proficiency in letter formation, it's a lot more meaningful to write actual English, sentences, lines of poems, ultimately paragraphs that mean something, that are beautiful language, that are doing something for the child besides just, the mechanics of moving your hand the right way over and over again. I think there's something that's really refreshing about copy work that mitigates against that kind of fatigue when you're just like writing the same word over and over again, or you're writing really dull sample sentences whose only purpose is to teach you the mechanics of handwriting. And the thing that I think is really beautiful and important about copy work is that it teaches a whole host of other language arts competencies as well. It reinforces good spelling. It reinforces proper usage in the language that you're copying in, which for most of us is primarily going to be English. And it teaches composition in the same way that art students learn to draw by going to a gallery and sitting in front of some work by a great master and copying it. That's how you learn technique. And the same thing is true in writing. The best way to learn to write well is to imitate good examples every day. So in fact, even though it's really simple and it doesn't take up much of your day, copywork is doing this massive amount of language arts heavy lifting. By itself, it's doing the work of a spelling program, it's doing the work of a grammar program, and it's doing the work of a formal composition program. And I would even venture to say that if you're crunched for time and you need to streamline and you need to simplify, excuse me, I would absolutely ditch your formal grammar book before I let copy work go. It's that important and it's that effective. So let's kind of take a look at the whole copywork picture. We're going to back up actually to the developmental stage before your child is really ready to start copywork. Here's Charlotte Mason on the beginnings of handwriting. As she says, I can only offer a few hints on the teaching of writing, though much might be said. And by this, she means penmanship. First, let the child accomplish something perfectly in every lesson, a stroke, a pot hook, by which I think she means like the bottom of a G or a J, a letter. Let the writing lesson be short. It should not last more than 5 or 10 minutes. I would say initially 5 minutes is long. Ease in writing comes by practice, but that must be secured later. In the meantime, the thing to be avoided is the habit of careless work, humpy M's, angular O's. Oh no, we must avoid those humpy M's and those angular O's. So here's a takeaway from the very beginning. Less is more. It's better to do one thing right, even if it's just a line, than it is to do a bunch of things sloppily. And you might also extrapolate from this the idea that it's better to wait until your child can competently write a stroke or a pot hook or a letter than to try to push writing too early. I mean, little children love to pick up pencils and pens and crayons. They like to scribble. They like to, they like to do things that they see older people doing, but this doesn't necessarily mean that they're ready, excuse me, to start actually learning handwriting, because that requires a level of fine motor control that most children are really not ready to exhibit until after they're 5. Boys are usually later than girls too. So when and where to begin? Okay, again, that timeline of fine motor development is different for every child. To make a sweeping sort of statistical generalization, boys are usually slower than girls to develop fine motor skills, and it's often more difficult for them. That certainly was the case in my own family. My girls, excuse me, my girls could manipulate a pencil better, I guess, earlier, and achieved a lot better handwriting than my boys did ever, really. Which again is well, I'll kind of address all of that. That's just to say that, I mean, the question here, I think, is not one of perfection ever. It's doing your personal best, and it's doing what you're ready to do when you're ready to do it. And this is really important. At the preschool stage, which, I mean, ages 3 and 4 are usually about when children really start to get interested in doing things like coloring and drawing. I mean, like a toddler might scribble because that's just interesting, and you're exploring, like, if I do this with the crayon, what happens? And, we probably have all had, our walls decorated and graffitied by our young children when we had our backs turned. But 3 and 4 are a really good age to focus on anything that will help your child to develop fine motor competencies, to strengthen those muscles in their hands and fingers and their eye-hand coordination. Coloring is great. Modeling clay is great, for example. I don't know just a whole lot about Montessori. A lot of my friends are Montessori experts, so I'm sort of relaying something secondhand here, but I know that there are an array of Montessori activities that are specifically geared toward pre-writing and preparation to write. So, I mean, things like drawing letters in the sand with your finger and learning letter formation that way before you have to advance to the stage of holding a pencil, which is its whole, I mean, to us, it's so automatic. And this is something that I always want to stress, that as educators, one huge hurdle for us is to remember, especially with our very young children, that things that are automatic for us were not always automatic, that our minds and our bodies had to learn those things, and that while we were learning those things, they were work. So, to us, we're so habituated to picking up a pencil and writing that to us it seems like just a natural human thing, like an involuntary reflex, like breathing. But to your young child, it is not like that at all. It is labor, and they have to think about it, and they're working to train their muscles. I mean, it's like you doing a couch to 5K program. You don't get up from the couch and immediately run the 5K. And it's probably going to be hard and painful even to run, to the end of the block and back to begin with. That's what learning to write is like for your child. So don't feel that you have to rush it, and do be mindful of the fact that this is a series of little labors that they're learning, and that in one sense, learning the shape of a letter and how to make it, and then learning how to make it by holding a pencil, are actually two different things. Like holding the pencil is its own whole skill. So these are just, I don't want to spend too much time on pre-writing, but these are just some things to bear in mind if you have children in the preschool zone. The rule always, at every age and every aspect of Charlotte Mason education, is to do only what isn't going to push the child to the point of fatigue and frustration. Do things shorter than you think you need to. Stop before the child has a chance to find the task unpleasant. This is absolutely true for writing. Once you've pushed your child into feeling that anything you're asking him to do is hard and tiring and unpleasant and maybe physically uncomfortable, then you're setting yourself up for resistance and battles over schoolwork. It's better on the front end to say, I'm going to do less, not more. I'm going to stop while we're happy. That's always the rule. And finally, as they're sort of moving into kindergarten, maybe starting to pick up a pencil a little bit more and practice some preliminary lines and strokes and letter formation with a pencil. This is a good age to be very mindful about the shape of your pencil, maybe using a pencil grip to help them develop the habit of a good grip, because this is really hard. I can tell you from experience, this is really hard, if not impossible, to change later. So things like, I'm trying to think what the name of the company is. The company that produces the Draw Right Now series, which is a really fun little penmanship series that involves drawing as well. Their company also sells things like triangular crayons, triangular pencils, all manner of little rubber grips that you can slide onto a pencil, pencils with a stem, like a mechanical pencil with a stem that's shaped like a U where your index finger is supposed to go. Anything that can really help your child train his muscles early on to having a good pencil grip is a really good idea, because again, if you wait until later, you're stuck with whatever pencil grip they've developed, which isn't the end of the world, but you want to try to help them hold the pencil in a way that will make writing easy for them. So all of this is up through maybe even into first grade, depending on your child's level of readiness. I mean, the schedule for doing all of this pre-writing activity and basic letter formation really depends on your child. And I would say that in that 5 to 6 age range, if they're melting down over doing something, it probably means they're not ready to do it and you should feel comfortable backing off and trying again later. But let's say that whatever, on his own schedule, your child has gotten to the point where he can form letters pretty fluently, copying letters, doing strokes, and can even copy whole words like in a handwriting workbook without difficulty. This is the point where you can transition from letter practice to actual copy work. And I would say, sort of informally, that through, I mean, beginning maybe in kindergarten, depending on readiness, maybe in first grade, which in Mater Amabilis is level 1B, a handwriting program or workbook is a useful thing because you do want to focus on letter formation. Um, you can make it more Charlotte Mason-y by simply not having your child repeat the same stroke or letter 15 times until it starts to get sloppy. I mean, you might have noticed if you've done this with children before, that, the typical handwriting notebook will say something like, copy the letter B all the way to the end of the line. And you've watched your child do it, and their first B is perfect, and their second B is pretty good, and their third B is okay. And by the end of the line, it just falls apart because their hand has gotten tired and they've gotten bored because it is boring to write the letter B over and over and over and over again. So that thing that Charlotte Mason said in the beginning, let the child accomplish something perfectly in every lesson, a stroke, a pot hook, a letter. Let the writing lesson be short. The thing to be avoided is the habit of careless work. Definitely bring this principle to bear on beginning writing if you're using a writing curriculum. The curriculum is your tool, it's not your master. The directions might say to write that B 10 times, but that doesn't mean that you have to do it. And it's probably better for your child to write one perfect B than to write 10 Bs and have half of them be sloppy. So, but let's say that you've accomplished all that. Your child is forming letters well, can copy single words. You're really ready to start copy work itself. Again, here's Charlotte Mason. She's saying children of 7 or 8, but I really would translate that as just when your child is ready. The earliest practice in writing proper for children of 7 or 8 should be not letter writing or dictation, but transcription, slow and beautiful work. By transcription, she means copy work, although we'll talk a little bit about what that actual process entails as Charlotte Mason means it to be implemented. But you are at this point when you are ready to transition to actual copy work. How do you do this? Well, your first question might be, what do I use? There are any number of pre-made copy books available. And actually, one of my children used several of the Memoria Press copybooks, which are for grades 1 through 3. Those are beautiful. They're great if you're busy and you don't have time to sort of deal with generating your own copy work. That is a really good option. For most of my children, their first copybooks were this kind of primary journal. This one might actually not be the Mead brand, but they're the same idea. And this is a helpful cover because it shows you what the pages look like on the inside. Note that they are primary ruled, that kind of early elementary school paper that has the red line for the bottom and then a dotted line halfway up. And then here's the top line. This is really helpful for good letter formation and keeping your writing even in size. It really helps your child to do his best work, to have enough room. Like first and second graders cannot write small. So you really need something like this. If you can't find a primary composition book like this, you can use a regular composition book, but just use, like in a wide ruled or college ruled notebook, like each of these spaces would be a whole line. Just use double lines so that your child can write big and have a middle line so that he knows where to bring up the bump of his H and the top of his I and his E. These are also fun because they have a blank space at the top where children can illustrate, and you can build in a little extra time into your copy work day for, to let your child illustrate at the top. Some children think this is fun. Some children don't think it's as much fun. I have some copybooks by my children, which are absolute works of art with colored pencils and drawings. And then I have a couple that are like every page, no matter what the copywork selection was, every page is illustrated with stick figures fighting with lightsabers. But whatever, that's a keepsake too. And it's fun for them to be able to do that. So I would use a book like this if you're making your own copy work, which actually isn't that hard, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Um, Something like this for first through third grades is a really good choice. After third grade, they can start transitioning to wide ruled pages, which don't have the middle line and aren't quite as big, as they're starting to gain more and more fine motor control, and they can write smaller and they don't need quite as much like visual guidance on the page to write well. You can make a transition to something else, but these are great for beginning copiers. This was my procedure for level 1 children, and you might find that other things work differently for you, but this worked well for me. If I was going to have copy work happen every day, which I was very much committed to, I mean, it doesn't do you much good to do it sporadically. It really has to be a daily habit. And for us, the first rule of making it a daily habit was that we did it absolutely first thing. So there was no way we could forget to do it. And this worked well for a number of reasons. First of all, because morning was chaotic. I mean, I would have kids all over the place. My older kids might be doing their own things, reading, listening to an audio book. I had a daughter who liked to get up and knit first thing in the morning while she listened to an audio book. Stuff would be going on. My younger kids, who were in this sort of like first and second grade zone, would get up and they'd be full of energy. They'd be playing. They'd have been outside with the dog. They're running around. People have one shoe on. They're not dressed. It's crazy. And somehow I've got to transition from all of this like entropy that's happening in the morning to order, because you can't really have school until you have some kind of sense of order. So I needed something to move them from one mode to another. Copy work was great for this. It was a thing that I could say, I could have it prepared and out on the table for them. I could say, all right, 5 minutes, you're going to come sit down. After 5 minutes, I'd say, time to come sit at the table. They could sit down. That's not hard to do, even if you're bouncing off the walls. And the work would be right in front of them. And it would be work that wasn't that demanding. I mean, copy work doesn't require you to use your brain that much. It's not like having to sit down and make up a story or having to sit down and immediately do math. It's not that demanding. It's kind of peaceful. I usually would turn on some classical music at this point, which was, covering our composer study base at the same time. Oh, look, we're listening to some Mozart. And this is kind of calming and ordering in and of itself. It signaled a mood shift from one part of the morning to the next part of the morning, from craziness to now it's time to do school. I always had their copybooks ready to go. And I did, I used, again, these Mead primary journals. And I made my own very short copy work while I was sitting down drinking my coffee and they were, bouncing off the walls somewhere or not up yet. Typically at this level, copy work would be no more than 2 lines. So very short. It did not take me long to write it out. I had two kids in level one at the same time doing this. And usually I would give them the same copy work. I mean, you don't want to make things that hard for yourself. So it would be the same thing. And it would be extremely short, short for me to write out and short for them to do. So it might be something like this. Let's say, I mean, I might give somebody maybe midway through first grade this kind of passage. You could even give somebody, so let's say, we're doing this. This is obviously the beginning of the Apostles' Creed, which is a good thing to write out, and you can make it last for a long time too, because you're only doing a little piece every day, but it's a good way to help somebody memorize the Apostles' Creed. You could even give somebody just, I believe, or in God. That would be okay as a copy work selection for a day. And I've broken this up into two lines. The next day, if I gave somebody, I believe in God one day, I might give them the Father Almighty the next day. And that would be it. And I've done this actually on a notebook of my own because I just wrote this out yesterday. So I have used, you notice that it's not primary ruled lines, but um, I've pretended that it was primary ruled. So I made it big. And notice that the way that I've set it up is so that the child has a space to write directly underneath my writing. This is really important. And I learned the hard way because I sort of read randomly about copywork before we started doing homeschooling. And even for older children, I found that it was really defeating if I said, okay, here's the book. I want you to copy this sentence. Here's your copybook. Looking back and forth, I mean, finding that sentence in the sea of text in the book, looking at the book, then looking at your copybook, seems like it wouldn't be that hard to us. That's really hard for a child. That's like extra transitions that give them more margin for error. And you really want them not to make mistakes. You want them to come away feeling successful because success is motivating. Failure is completely demotivating. So you want to do whatever you can to set your child up to do the task that you want them to do well. So some of that is clear instruction. It was very clear when I laid their copybook on the table in front of them, turned to the selection that I wanted them to copy, and I had it written out and it was clear, and I might even make marks like this, like these, I drew these in just for emphasis for your benefit, but I would do this for the child too, little arrows right here. Whatever you have to do to make your expectations extremely clear so there's no question about what you want them to do. And you've made it easy for them to do it. It is much easier for a young child to just look right up and copy each letter as they're looking at it. They can do it and not make a mistake. Now, I might also set this up. I'm trying to imagine, okay, I'm putting this down in front of my child. I will probably make some remarks to my child about the copy work. I might say, notice, is this a capital or a lowercase I? Do we know why it's capitalized? Well, we could say, because the first letter of every sentence is capital. By the combination of I and E, but that sometimes you might see CEI, like in the word receive. And that is another way that sound is made. Getting them to notice things that are happening in the language. I might help get the child with me to read the selection out loud and sound it out. So we get in, a tiny amount of reading practice and we can talk about language. So This would take maybe no more than a minute. Like I wouldn't spend a long time lecturing at them about it all, but you get in a grammar lesson this way, and they're clearer about their copying. Their brain is focused on their copying so they can do a better job. So things that worked for us, in short, especially at this level: short, again, no more than the child can do without becoming fatigued. Again, their hands get tired. What's automatic for us is labor for them. I always chose Copywork selections. Now, Charlotte Mason says that, Copywork is more meaningful when they've chosen the selection. And I mean, you may find that this is true in your house, but I found out really fast that if I wanted to spend all day on Copywork and nothing else, the way to do it was to say, find one of your books and get something to copy out of that book. I mean, this was just unbelievable decision fatigue and disruption. I mean, no, maybe this, maybe that, I don't know, and if you're standing there going, just pick something, I mean, the whole atmosphere of your day is gone by the time, everybody's stressing out over a Copywork selection. So I just chose it and said, here you go. This is what you're doing. And that made it easy. Typically, I would want to pick things that were pretty simple, as in not too demanding, but always just above the child's own ability level in writing. I would never use the child's own writing as a Copywork selection. I would not have them dictate a story to me and then copy it for their Copywork. I mean, maybe outside of school time, we did some of that, but for Copywork, I always wanted the selection to represent, it wasn't always fancy, it wasn't always complex, but I wanted it to represent good prose. They need to be copying from good models. Don't limit them to their own ability level in Copywork. There's a place for their independent writing. There's a place for them to dictate stuff to you and you write it down. I sometimes did have them do letters that way. We wrote a lot of letters when my kids were young, and I would have them dictate a letter to me. I'd write it out and they could copy it in their own writing to send to somebody, but that wasn't our Copywork for the day. Copywork fulfilled a different role, and that role of influence on their compositional writing, I guess, is a way to put it, as opposed to their penmanship. The kind of writing that would make them over time better writers themselves was always what I wanted to put in front of them when we were doing Copywork. Again, writing on every line so that the child could write directly underneath my line, and getting Copywork done absolutely first thing in the school day so that it was a daily thing. And it really, I don't really remember ever fighting with my youngest children over doing Copywork. It was just what we did. Like, we had breakfast, we went nuts for a while, we sat down and did Copywork every day. I don't really remember anybody fighting me over it because it was just so automatic. And that's how we got it to happen every day. And that is why it was effective. It is not going to be effective if it's a thing that you do, maybe once a month when you remember. I mean, that's not going to work. It's got to be a daily habit. And for us, these things were the key to making it a daily, easy habit. Okay, so some sources at this level. Again, if you use a pre-made copybook, you've got your Copywork already made, but it's very easy to make your own. And incidentally, I have terrible handwriting. My natural handwriting is awful. Don't think you can't do teacher writing just because your natural handwriting is not very good. Believe me, especially if you're writing something on primary lined paper, you can form good letters, even if it's not your natural handwriting. It's like you can pretend to have teacher handwriting. And, if I can do it, anybody can do it pretty much. Things that I pulled from, I usually would be reading morning prayer while I was having my coffee, and I might pull an antiphon. or I might pull part of a psalm. I might pull the scripture reading. But that was a big source. Usually the kids could tell what I was reading in morning prayer because it ended up in their copywork an awful lot. If you're doing Mater Amabilis, you're doing poetry at least once a week. Now you can pick one poem to copy it. You don't have to keep, like you can move on in your poetry reading, but you can pick a poem to copy and make it last you as long as you need it to last before you have to find a new copywork selection, because they're copying one or two lines at a time at most. So making your own copywork is made easy by the fact that you don't continually need to be coming up with new selections. You just find something and you give them a little piece of it until it's done. You can open one of their school books at random and just find a good sentence, any good sentence. Try to vary syntax so that, every sentence isn't like see spot run. Give them sentences that begin with dependent clauses. Give them compound sentences, compound complex sentences. Again, you can take more than a day to write a sentence, but so even a sentence can be a selection that lasts you for a while. But this is how they learn good syntax. Again, they're absorbing the rhythms of good written English every time they sit down to do copy work. So that's another good source. I also used things like, I forget how I stumbled on this. Maybe I read about it somewhere. I can't remember. But there is this book that is available pretty widely online, through like archive.org. You can get it through Google Books, whatever, free mechanism you want to use. It's a public domain book that has mostly poetry, but also other selections arranged by phoneme family. And this doesn't mean that like they all sound like the cat sat on the mat, but it might mean that if they're doing the short A sound, cat or mat is going to turn up somewhere in the selection, so that, you can make it dovetail with your phonics study. For example, oh, look, here's a word that uses whatever this phoneme is that you're working on right now. Again, you can break these selections up. They're usually pretty short. They might be as short as 2 lines. They might be a whole like 4 or 5 or 6 line stanza. You can break them up as you need to make them really short and make them last a long time. But anyway, that's Wheeler's Graded Studies in Great Authors, which is a great resource. And I used it all the way through like level 3, which is middle school. So, for a free resource, that's good value. Okay, here's another example. And again, I wrote this in my own notebook. This might be something that I would give maybe to a 3rd grader at the end of 3rd grade, maybe a 4th grader, somebody who's starting to transition to regular, wide ruled notebook paper. And I just did this. I didn't actually do a whole lot of this with my kids, but you can. You're still writing pretty big and you want to still give them pretty much room. But these are the first 2 lines of Robert Frost's Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, which is a great poem to memorize. And I wanted to preserve the lines as they actually are. So I just wrote right across the double page spread here. And again, the child is not writing as big as he would, he's writing with a little more control. Obviously, I make mistakes too. He's writing with a little more control than he had a year or so ago, but he still sort of needs some room to sprawl out so he can copy the lines right under here. It's still at this stage not really realistic to expect the child to copy from a separate book. You want to minimize distractions and transitions in the midst of their work so that they have less margin for mistakes. And I mean, again, so much of homeschool success in any subject is how you manage the situation. I mean, you can't really, this is true in all kinds of things that, some things are habit training, but some things are your effort at management. This is a situation that is managed as were these other examples that I gave. These are situations that are managed so that the child can succeed. And, this is part of your work as an educator to figure out how for your child you are best going to manage the situation so that the child can do the task at hand successfully. And again, I've given a really short selection, only 2 lines. I would just, tomorrow, I would write, "He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow," in the same way. And I would continue until we finished the poem. And that would give me many days of copy work right there. Okay, here's some more third grade copy work illustrated with this charming little dog. The child who did this actually is a visual artist today. She's an art major in college. And so she was a reasonably, this was pretty early in the year. Actually, this might even have been just about the first entry in this copy book. So you can see, we're learning cursive. And this is fine. Actually, it's funny. I stopped. I guess I was going to put "In God My Savior" on the next page, but she just went ahead and finished it. I don't know why there's an S there exactly, but she obviously finished the line because she knew it. And, if you're wondering what's okay in terms of copy work, I mean, basically, my baseline was if they did it, I was happy with it. You don't ever make them do it over. I'm assuming that I probably gave this as one day's copy work. Again, this is an early cursive learner where, we have some letters floating around here. Things are not, we've definitely got our crooked M's. Sorry, Charlotte Mason. We did not do this quite perfectly, but this was kind of a personal best for this child on that day. It's readable. She obviously took care with it. This was somebody actually who had a visual processing disorder, and which gave her a lot of trouble in reading. But copy work really helped her with sort of tracking and keeping things all together. But I'm wondering if some of the floating letters aren't a function of her having some difficulty with how she saw text on a page. Anyway, I would definitely not, you notice that I didn't go back and mark this up with red. I didn't note mistakes. I just said, "Thank you." And maybe the next day I would give something a little bit shorter and say the next day, notice how we have some floaty letters. Let's try to have all our letters, let's write one word maybe where all the letters are standing on the red line. This is where having these different colored lines are really helpful, because you can say, let's have all our letters stand on the red line. Let's have the tops of our little letters just barely touch the dotted line. It makes it easy for the child to understand what you're asking for. And the next day is a good day to do a little debriefing about, okay, yesterday was good. Let's have some goals for today. So just some random thoughts, which again, I have written out, even though I'm going to say them. Most of my children did not find handwriting particularly easy. My husband and I do not have beautiful handwriting. In fact, one of my husband's employers, while he was in college, told him that his handwriting was a moral flaw, which we've always kind of laughed about. Our first child went to school where she learned handwriting. This was in an English school where there was lots of emphasis on handwriting and clear penmanship from the very beginning, because one of these days you're going to be taking your college entrance exams, which are essays, and it's important that they be legible. Anyway, this child literally developed panic attacks over handwriting. She came home and cried at night about handwriting. It was a source of shame for her. I would obviously encourage you not to make handwriting a source of shame for your child. I probably swung too far the other way as a response. I did not belabor perfection with anybody because our problem was imploding because of perfectionism, not anything else. So I kind of overcompensated. And this might or might not have been a good call, but I mean, all my kids have gone to college. I have two college graduates, one who has a master's degree, one who's been a classroom teacher. In fact, the child who had the panic attacks ended up as a classroom teacher and taught herself, well, she taught herself cursive because somehow she never managed to learn it because of the age that she was in English school where they don't do cursive. And then when we started homeschooling, anyway, she learned cursive in her 20s when she started teaching school. And she has beautiful handwriting when she turns it on. So, anyway, all's well that ends well. I would say typically it's fine to consider your child's personal best as his version of perfection. I'm usually fine with handwriting just being legible. I'm fine as long as they're not experiencing pain or discomfort in the act of writing. You know, once they're older than 5 or 6, you've probably lost the battle for pencil grip unless you do extensive occupational therapy. Um, Once they're out of that phase, it is really, really hard to change that muscle memory and those habits. And I just let that go. As long as the person could write and as long as it didn't give them, really physical discomfort in writing. I mean, people do kind of just develop their own methods and compensations and to a certain extent that was never a hill I wanted to die on. So just some thoughts, not some rules for you, but my thoughts about my standards. Okay, so we've gotten to the end of third grade, which is level 1A. As you probably know, in Mater Amabilis, level 1B is first grade, roughly in American school terms. Level 1A, years 1 and 2, are second and third grade. So level 1 is the whole early elementary piece where you're really solidifying these basic skills. Again, every child is on a different timeline, and some children have particular challenges that mean that at the beginning of fourth grade, they might not be where another child is at the beginning of fourth grade. So when I'm talking in terms of these levels and developmental stages, please understand that I'm not telling you where your child absolutely should be or there's a problem. I'm just telling you in sort of general terms what the whole trajectory of development is. Um, of course, around this age, as you're transitioning from third to fourth grade, this is a time when lots of things typically normalize. I mean, the daughter who was a teacher taught third grade in her first job, and she routinely had third graders show up who still couldn't read. By midway through third grade, they were reading. Um, so that level 1 early elementary phase is a phase when a lot of kids are still developmentally all over the map in terms of their reading, their writing, all kinds of things are sort of a big slush for them developmentally. But usually by the time you're heading into fourth grade, everybody has pretty much plateaued out, which is why that's sort of like around age 8, between 8 and 9 is when, if somebody's really not accomplishing something or they're still doing things like they still can't read, they're still struggling with writing, maybe they're still reversing letters and numbers routinely, that's when those things really start to be serious red flags. And it's good to be on the lookout for them and address them sooner rather than later. So these are all kind of caveats to anything that I have to say, that I know some children have particular struggles. My kids have had some struggles, and I'm mostly talking in general terms to give you a framework of, where you can sort of set your expectations. So copy work for older elementary and beyond. My own rules again, I still kept it pretty short. I still kept the time frame pretty short. Somebody might be copying a much longer selection overall, and and have the stamina to write the entirety of Paul Revere's Ride or something. They're still doing it just a couple of lines a day, but they have the stamina to keep going with it over many, many, many days. But it's still not taking up a huge amount of time in our school day. It's still the beginning of the school day, chaos. 5 minutes, we're going to sit down at the table. Okay, it's time to sit down at the table. Everybody's in their chair, their copybooks in front of them, the music is on. We take maybe 5 minutes because it's the beginning of our school day and we have a lot to do, but we're going to touch this before we do anything else. So the biggest difference is how I'm presenting the copywork selection at this stage. At this stage, we've left the Mead primary journals behind, and these were my favorites for any older kids. I bought so many of these 50-cent cardboard composition books over the years. I cannot even tell you. I still like to use them for my own purposes. These are cheap. They lie flat on the table, and you'll see why that's really important in a minute. And unlike spiral notebooks, they're sturdy, like the pages don't tear out, which is important. I didn't invest in really nice, like moleskin or, fancy blank books for copywork, because if you messed up in your beautiful blank book with the creamy pages and everything about it just saying expensive keepsake, that was really stressful. But and after a while, if you have multiple kids, things like that get really expensive. 50 cents is the perfect price point for me. But these did have, like I still have these. The one in this picture is probably 10 years old and it's held up. It looks good as new. And so they make nice keepsakes, among other things. And they stand up very well to daily use. So for 50 cents, that's pretty good. So I was writing out the selections differently with a little more challenge for the student. When Charlotte Mason talks about transcription, she's talking about what I've described here. Inevitably in the beginning, a younger child really is going to be copying letter by letter. And, and that's one reason why having the words right above the line where he's copying helps. But as it becomes fluent, you want to start to encourage the child to look at the whole word and think about it, and then write it without looking back at it. And then eventually to look at maybe 2 or 3 words at a time and really think about what they look like and imprint them on his mind and copy from that picture in his mind rather than looking back anxiously at every letter. This helps him to copy more fluently and fluidly, but it's also helping to develop that visual memory that helps with spelling. Obviously you've studied phonics in learning to read. As you've been doing copy work, you're pointing out spelling rules and the way words look and how they sound as you're presenting the selection every day, especially as your child is learning to read. You're using this kind of in conjunction with your reading program. Dictation, which starts around level 2, whenever copy work is really fluent, builds on this practice of transcription where you're reading the selection aloud to your child a few words at a time, and he's writing it from memory. And what he's holding in his mind is how the words look. And that's how he can spell them correctly. And dictation is a whole other subject, not for today, but you're really, as you're transitioning into this older elementary period, you're starting to dovetail his copywork practice with the idea of dictation and with reinforcing his sense of how words look. Because, for all of us, I do that. I'm a reasonably strong speller, but I will write something sometimes and I'll look at it and I'll think, that doesn't look right. And then I'll go look it up. And it's that instinct about what looks right and what doesn't that I think really guides what we think of as the natural speller. And it's a learned instinct. The more you're habituated to the way words look visually, the more you have that instinct of, oh, yeah, that's right, or that's not right. And this doesn't mean that you're not learning spelling rules and applying them, that you haven't learned phonics, but that this is an important part of the whole picture of being a competent speller and therefore a competent writer. So I really, really pressed transcription as we were making the transition into level 2, which is grades 4 and 5, upper elementary in Mater Amabilis. Here's an example from another one of my level 2 children, a different child from the one who had written the Magnificat a few slides ago. I wish I knew whose poem this is. I can't remember. I didn't put the author's name, which is I should have done. Notice the difference in how I'm presenting the copy work this time. Instead of writing every other line for the child to write underneath, this is what we call a double page spread. And when I've explained this in the Facebook group, I think people have been confused about what I meant. Here is the composition book laid out flat on the table so that you're looking at 2 pages spread out in front of you. That's what a double page spread is. Here's the page on the left, which is the back of another page. Here's the page on the right. I've gone to writing my selection on the left-hand side of the double page spread. This is still easier for the child than looking in a completely other book. It's still right there. He has, and this is somebody with ADHD. So I was really trying to minimize anything that would derail his attention from the work at hand. And I mean, moving your eyes from one book to another is a potential derailment. So I was trying to minimize that. So keeping it all in the same book. Now this is a poem of 4 little quatrains, which I have written out. I wrote it out all at once, but I didn't necessarily have him write the whole poem. I might have him write the first quatrain on Monday, the second quatrain Tuesday, the third quatrain Wednesday, the fourth quatrain Thursday. That takes us through 4 days of the week. And these are pretty, they're pretty short lines. So I might give him as many as 4 lines because they're not terribly long. Notice too that I've been really directive on this side. I don't remember what previous pages looked like, but I can tell looking back at this, I don't really have any memory of this lesson, but I can tell looking back at this that one of my goals was to make sure that this person wrote the right thing in the right place and that it wasn't just a garbled mess on the page. So notice that I've said the title goes here, then you skip a line. Here's where your stanza starts. You skip a line. Here's stanza 2. And I'm constantly, I guess I was trying to get him to write, to leave this left-hand margin because I think he must not have been doing that. And that's what all these arrows are for. But this is a really good example. Again, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but this is pretty successful for this person. And I can see, even 10 years later, when I have no memory of the lesson, I can see how I managed it. I made my expectations, and I probably talked through this with him too. I made my expectations extremely clear. Write this here. Do this. Don't start writing all the way over here in the margin. Start writing to the right of the red line because this is conventional and you'll want to know how to do this correctly. Now, there's some places where he obviously ran out of room. This is somebody who did not have a lot of facility with fine motor skills. I mean, his handwriting is still, you know, kind of difficult, but it's clear, it's legible. He did it mostly correctly. This is a reasonably successful lesson. And again, he was doing it day by day. I guess we were getting sick of it by the time we got to the end here because writing gets an awful lot bigger. But reasonably successful lesson, probably this person's personal best at about age 10, 9 or 10 is when this is happening, probably 10. More from the same copybook. It wasn't always super neat, but here's another way that I did things. I was obviously pulling stuff from scripture here, and I put the verse, and then he wrote underneath it. Now, if I had wanted him to skip a line, I would have been smart to put an arrow here and a note to skip it, but I didn't do that. Notice here we have one miscopied word. I can guarantee you this person knows how to spell the word 8, and he probably did then too. I mean, one thing that you do have to watch out for with various either ADHD or visual processing disorders is that people just either literally don't see letters, like they might see the first letter of a word and guess what the word is, or they just space things. So I think we spaced an H here and didn't write it. But again, not a bad effort for this person. We were really struggling with letter formation. In fact, I was getting him to practice letter formation. There are lots of pages with that, but you know, again, I took this as somebody's personal best. So, you know, I hope it's helpful to you. I've seen lots and lots and lots of beautiful child copy work. We didn't necessarily always have beautiful copy work. I was okay with that, as you can see. So beyond copy work is something that usually it's foundational through all of elementary school in a Charlotte Mason education. It starts to taper off in middle school, and you're building other things in at the same time. You add studied dictation in level 2, and that continues through levels 3, 4, and I did it into level 5. It kind of dropped off midway through high school for us. And eventually it will sort of edge out formal copy work. What typically replaces copy work for the rest of the student's school career is keeping a commonplace book, which is really their thing. It's a notebook like a copybook that the student keeps, and as he or she is reading, as passages stand out from that reading, it's like something you want to remember. You write it down in your commonplace book. And the best way really to get people to keep a commonplace book is to keep one yourself for your own reading and to let them see you doing it. Your chances of having your child actually do that will be a lot greater if it's something that you have been modeling for them as a good thing to do, an enjoyable thing to do, and not just one more school assignment. Here's an example actually from another family of some upper level. I think this is a commonplace book, but it could be copywork. I'm not really sure. This is really beautiful. And here this person is obviously at this stage. This is, I think the mom said, either late level 3 or level 4. At this stage, the student is clearly copying from another book. It's not written down in the copybook. The selection's not written down. They're just copying. The mom wanted to emphasize that even though these look like longer selections, that the student still only did 5 or maybe at most 10 minutes of copy work a day and stopped when the timer dinged. So they're not like writing this whole, this whole sunset isn't necessarily one day's copy work, or the hawk with whatever these looks like. Most of these are, here's 2 quatrains, this one's 4. um, Longer selections, but not necessarily all done at the same sitting, and the student is still, trying to do their personal best. So again, you always want to have the student stop before fatigue steps in. With an older kid in level 3 or 4, you can give the longer passage all in one chunk, but either make it really clear where you want them to stop or set a timer. And again, your management practices change as your child gets older and they become more accomplished and good at self-management, which is your ultimate goal in all things. You want your graduate eventually to have what Charlotte Mason calls moral and intellectual self-management. And you will see as your child grows that their capacity for self-management grows with them, and they can do more things at age 13, 14, 15 than they could do when they were 6 and 7 and 8. But you're still wanting them to stop while they're fresh, and you're still wanting to make whatever your desired procedure is very clear. Write 4 lines and stop. Write until the timer dings and stop. The clearer your rules are, the more clearly you have thought through your expectations and how you want them to be carried out, and then communicate all of that to your child, the more able your child is to have success. And again, success is motivating. Failure, being reprimanded, feeling like you did something wrong is demotivating. That's what makes people implode, and it's what makes them hate whatever it is that's been set for them to do. So continually, part of your work as an educator is to be thinking, how am I going to give this person success? I mean, you don't want to micromanage, especially an older student, but you're trying to give them success. So in summary, Copywork is an absolutely effective language arts tool. As I said at the beginning, it does all the heavy lifting of several different kinds of language arts curriculum in and of itself in roughly 5 minutes a day. It really does, I guarantee you. But there are caveats to this. You have to do it every day. It has to be a habit. It can't be something that you think about once a month, or, oh, we'll do an hour of copy work to make up for the 2 weeks that we didn't do. No, ditch other stuff before you ditch copy work. It has to be done consistently. It has to be done using the most excellent and varied examples that you can find, so that your child is always imitating and absorbing excellent writing. That is how your child will learn to write well. It must be presented reasonably with success in mind. That theme I keep hammering. Can't be too long, can't be too hard, should stretch the child a little bit beyond his ability level, but not make him feel defeated. A rule of thumb for dictation, which actually applies to copy work too, is that if the student makes more than 2 mistakes in a dictation session, then the selection was too hard. It was too long. He wasn't well enough prepared. It was too hard, and you dial back. The same thing is true for copy work. If you find your child writing sloppily or copying, more than one word in a selection wrong, then that's a sign that there's too much of it, and you should dial it back to what the child can do successfully. It doesn't have to be babyish, but it should be readily doable by the child, so that again, he comes away feeling like, I did a really good job. that's what's going to make him want to do it again. I mean, your child might never love copy work. I don't know that it was any of my kids' favorite thing to do during the day, but it really can become an easy non-negotiable in your homeschool, just a thing we do, and we don't fight about it any more than we fight about, brushing our teeth. I mean, kids do fight about brushing their teeth on the way to making that a habit, but you kind of want to get to the point where nobody can imagine the school day not including this element. Might not be their favorite, but it's there, like the weather. So, I mean, I guess a last thought that I would want to leave you with is that there really is something beautiful about copying. It's a very meditative thing, which is why it's a nice thing to start the day with. I mean, this might appeal imaginatively to your children, to think about monks in the scriptorium copying out these texts and illuminating them. I mean, you can even look at some illuminated manuscripts and find examples of texts that monks copied and made little doodles in the margins and things like that. It's really charming. But, to show them that they're doing something that people did when they preserved the great texts of Western civilization, that they're engaged in the same kind of process, and that it can be really calming and beautiful and meaningful. And I really do hope that this is your experience and that your children will come away feeling that way about the copy work that they do. So I hope this has been helpful. Have a great day. Oh, and here are some helpful links and resources. I've written a good bit on my blog, abandonhopefullyhomeschooling.com, about copy work and other elements of Charlotte Mason education. And I've included some links to some pre-made copybooks that I did at one stage. You can also, again, get pre-made copybooks from vendors like Memoria Press, and I've used theirs. They're very nice. An old essay of mine, The Joy of Copywork, is available at the Mater Amabilis curriculum website, materamabilis.org, where I talk in greater depth about all the things that I think copywork accomplishes as a language arts program. Again, Wheeler's Graded Studies and Great Authors is a good resource for copywork passages, and also Simply Charlotte Mason's Spelling Wisdom series, which is really oriented toward dictation, but you can absolutely use it as a copywork source too. And again, you can always break up passages into smaller increments than they're presented. All resources are your tools. They are not your masters. So use them in a way that works for you and your child at their particular stage. And here again is this lovely passage from St. Augustine, which I had completely forgotten that I had ever assigned, but it's fun to see again with a little illustration at the top. So wishing you and your children many happy days of copy work ahead. Have a great day.